Welcome back to Jupiter in the 10th house. We are now on episode 3, so we're going to be looking at Jupiter in Taurus in the 10th house. And the example chart that will help us illustrate this belongs to the very famous painter Pablo Picasso. In episode 1, we established the basic template for what Jupiter in the 10th house in general should symbolize. And we could summarize all that information in the shorthand keywords of sage-like, transparent, and famous. Now we want to do a similar summary for what Jupiter in Taurus represents. I have a video on Jupiter in Taurus. I'll put a link to that in the description below if you want to follow up on those details. For our purposes right now, we can just summarize it with these shorthand terms. Jupiter in Taurus is studious, sexy, dedicated, and prosperous. Studious because of how much wisdom is involved with Jupiter and Taurus. Sexy because of how much reproduction and fertility is going on with Jupiter and Taurus. Dedicated because of the honesty and the loyalty. And prosperous because of the increase from Jupiter and the wealth from Taurus. Now, with these two sets of information, we can begin to sort out what Jupiter in the 10th house in Taurus should be interpreted as. But we can get one more set of information first, which is very important. This is if we use the whole sign house system, which I highly recommend. In that case, if Jupiter is in Taurus in the 10th house, then it must be the 5th and the 8th lords. So we can try to interpret the 5th and the 8th lords in the 10th house and add that to what we know about this situation. So the 10th house is the public. The 5th house is creativity, and the 8th house is vitality. So what's going on when you have the 5th and the 8th lords combine and go to the 10th house, you have the creative vitality is getting an outlet. So you're going to find a lot of expressiveness and a lot of creative energy to express. Now we put these three sources of symbolism together and we look for where they're on the same page. And that's how we interpret what Jupiter in 10th house in Taurus is like. For example, this expressive creative energy thing is very similar to sexiness. Because that's what sexiness is creative energy expressing itself. And remember, what we're talking about behind these shorthand terms is the 8th house going into the 10th house. Is the 8th lord, the lord of sexiness, going into the 10th house, the house of openness. Or in Jupiter in Taurus's case, we're talking about the planet of reproduction going into the sign of fertility. So we should interpret two effects from this. First of all, people with Jupiter and Taurus in the 10th house are very creative and expressive. So very likely they're going to excel in the arts. And that also has a sexual dimension to it. So people with Jupiter and Taurus in the 10th house, they have a lot of sexual vitality that needs an outlet. And the particular quirk about this is they need to be recognized for their sexiness. Another thing about Jupiter and Taurus in the 10th house is that Jupiter in Taurus is very studious and Jupiter in the 10th house is very sagacious. So therefore, we can say that people with Jupiter and Taurus in the 10th house, they're very studious. In other words, they like to spend time with books or other sources of information. And that reason why they do that is they like to improve and refine their talents and their knowledge base. Finally, Jupiter in Taurus is prosperous, and Jupiter in the 10th house is also very famous and successful. So Jupiter in Taurus in the 10th house is particularly prosperous. This has a financial aspect to it, and it also has an aspect that just affects how well known or famous the person is. So as I mentioned in the beginning, the example of a person who's well known with Taurus 10th house Jupiter is Pablo Picasso. Very interesting and really good illustration for this. The wealthiest artist in the history of humanity. It's very, very creative, very, very expressive. Definitely has this sexual dynamic that we were talking about. and always in a studio doing his talent, refining his talent. If we look more carefully at his actual birth chart, we can ask, why is he so artistic? As always, you look at the 11th house, the 3rd house, and the 5th house, because those are the essential houses for artists they need to combine. Because it's the house of performance and art, the 11th, with the house of skill, the 3rd, and the house of creativity, the 5th. So in Picasso's case, his 11th lord becomes very influential by joining the 1st lord. And then it becomes very creativized or artisticized by having an exact aspect from the 5th lord, who, by the way, is our Jupiter in the 10th house in Taurus. Now, about his 3rd house, his 3rd lord is in the 3rd house, right on the cusp of it, right at the most sensitive degree, which is equal to the degree of the ascendant. Furthermore, his moon, his mental center, is in his 5th house, the house of creativity, also quite near to the cusp of that house. So that's how you predict a great artist from this chart. And how about being very famous? Well, he has the 5th lord join the 7th lord in the 10th house for a very dominant Raja Yoga. And if you want some kind of success and fame, etc., then Raja Yoga is what you need to look for. So now you should be able to see how an individual birth chart modifies the basic template of what you understand. So, for example, Pablo Picasso's chart modified the basic qualities of Jupiter and Taurus in the 10th house, which was to be very creative, sexy, very studious, and very prosperous. It gave it a particular unique spin that another individual with the same placement won't have. And further, that whole template of Jupiter and Taurus in the 10th house is a modification of a more basic template of Jupiter in the 10th house in general, which we say is sage-like, transparent, and famous. If you want to understand the whole context of your chart, the soil in which your interpretive seeds grow, then visit my website, vicdecara.com, and click Readings. My complete chart report explains each and every nook and cranny of your chart and will keep you occupied in self-discovery for years. I also have 2 groundbreaking new reports. The first of these, your nakshatra, organizes your active nakshatras in order of their importance to you and presents the fundamental interpretations for the planets that occupy them. And the newest report, Star Strength, uses a system called Tara-Bala to unfold 90 interpretations of the nuanced relationships between all the planets in your chart, which paints a rich and detailed picture of how your various strengths cooperate or compete with each other. Order these or any of my reports and accelerate your journey to deeper self-understanding.